Welcome to Commons Conversations, a summer series of interviews with campaigners sharing their experiences and insights into activism, learning in movements, radical history, and more. The program is broadcast by Community Radio 3CR and produced by the Commons Social Change Library, a website containing over 1,500 resources for campaigners, which can be accessed for free at commonslibrary.org. This week we're bringing you a conversation that Emily Trounce-Wood had with Lad and Annie McGovern at Albury Creek on Arabunna land during 2024. Al and Annie have spent 4 decades opposing the nearby Olympic Dam uranium mine at Roxby Downs. Throughout the 1970s, Australians opposed the expansion of uranium mining in Australia via protests at ports and in rallies numbering up to 50,000 people. With uranium mining proposed at Roxby Downs, activists came together. They were opposed to the dangers associated with all stages of the nuclear cycle, as well as the massive waste of water involved in an arid zone and the abrogation of Indigenous sovereignty. In August of 1983, hundreds were arrested during 9 days of action at the proposed Olympic Dam site. Afterwards, Annie, Al and others maintained a year-long vigil, despite evictions by the South Australian Government's Police Tactical Unit, known as the Star Group. In 1984, the Federal Australian Labor Party adopted a policy of supporting 3 uranium mines. Mines at Ranger and Narbarlek in Northern Territory already existed, but the policy allowed for a new mine at Roxby Downs to be added. In response, another major protest was launched on August 19, 1984. With the aim of hindering and frustrating the mine while drawing public attention to it, another blockade carried out road occupations, site invasions, street theatre, letterboxing of the mine camp regarding safety issues, lock-ons, and a cyclist cavalcade. Further actions followed this, and combined, the protests succeeded in getting word out about the dangers of uranium mining. In the decades since, protests, including the Lizards' Revenge protestivals in 2012 and 2016, have periodically occurred at the site. Citizen science concerning water misuse and other issues has also played a role in informing submissions concerning operations at the mine. Such research has also supported challenges to the mine and campaigns to close it. In this interview, Al and Annie talk about their experiences during the 1983 and 84 blockades, as well as activism, support and citizen science work they've done in the decades since.
So we're here on Arabunna country in the Dingo Den at Albury Creek with Al and Annie, and would love for you guys to tell me a bit about what brought you to Roxby in the first place, or to Arabunna country.
Long story. Back in the 70s, there was a lot of activity towards no more wars. So uranium mining was really not on the cards. People, there had been a couple of mines already established in the Northern Territory, and the people up there really resisted those sorts of activities. So it became pretty widely known amongst the Australian public to leave it in the ground. There was traditional knowledge, there was everything to suggest that, post the Second World War, there was, what happened at Hiroshima, Nagasaki, all those things. There were tests in the Pacific that really were not, they were virtually blowing up people's homelands in the Pacific. So that's the Americans, and Maralinga, of course. It took a long time for that to actually be exposed, but by the 70s people knew about it, and people actually were really taking notice of what had been a sort of a situation where the country was just open for grabs. People started to go, no, this has gone too far. The same with the logging in the forest, all the things that were happening that were really impacting on the continent. And so the consciousness of people was really highlighted. And because I came through Nimbin in the early 70s, as a young person, I was able to be, I was educated at every level of life through the people I met there and the way we lived, the connection with the country, living very basically. We lived in the bush, and that was, a really, learning ground for me personally. And so the stream of things that happened from 81 to 83 was what that transition from the forest out here to the desert. People were just on the move everywhere and trying to protect the country. And that's what, for me, that's how I ended up at Roxby in the first place. Yeah.
And what was that first blockade? Tell me about that, or the first interaction.
Well, we'd come from the Franklin campaign, and it was seen that non-violent direct action was a methodology, a sort of a strategy and a tactic that had shown success with the Franklin. And so people were on a bit of a high because we thought that we could use this and do other campaigns. And so on the back end of the Franklin River campaign, Roxby was about to start. So, Annie and I, we met at the Franklin. We came over to South Australia, and we came up to Roxby for the first blockade in 1983. That was August 83. And that was an amazing experience. We had probably 1,000 people turn up in a convoy of about 80 vehicles. And I think there was about 800 arrests during the 2-week blockade. And so it was organised by a group called Campaign Against Nuclear Energy, CANE. And like the Franklin, uranium was right at the forefront of people's minds. And so, of course, after the blockade, people had to go back to their homes. But Annie and I, and others, a few others, realised the value of having a presence. And so we stayed, and as the Roxby Vigil, to be that presence there, and to also be a base for others to come to if they wanted to do any actions, or if they wanted to do research or into the uranium industry per se. We were there for 12 months, living inside the it was a miscellaneous purposes lease at the time. So we lived through the 4 seasons through till August 1984, when a second blockade was organised. But prior to that, that we had the Staff Force come in and evict us. That was as a result of it going from a miscellaneous purposes lease into a mining lease. And at that time, we knew that there was something potentially going to happen, and the cook, the elder and traditional owner of the land, Maxie Thomas, he came out to stay with us, and then there were people who came over from the eastern states.
Daintree, they came from the Daintree.
And so what happened was that the Staff Force came in, they evicted us, they forcibly manhandled the traditional owner off his land. They grabbed him, 2 police grabbed him by an arm and dragged him backwards to the paddy wagon, and that's how Roxby began, with the forcible removal of the traditional owner of Cookita country for that area. The second blockade came, and a lot of people came. We did actions, but by then we were outside of the mining site, within the mine site, and now we were probably about 8 kilometres away at the intersection of the Andamuka and Roxby turnoff. But we had another rolling blockade, also organised by CANE, and it was a rolling blockade where different states came during the school holidays, so that it was a staggered blockade. We continued to do actions for a period, probably for a few more months, till about late October, early November, and then the Staff Force came in again and evicted us. And we found ourselves, probably about 30 of us, at being dumped at Maxie Thomas's camp in Andamuka. Well, that wasn't a good situation, because we were right in the middle of redneck country in a way, and so, but we wanted to continue to oppose the uranium mine. So we thought that a different angle might be to in relation to the water that Roxby were extracting from up near Lake Eyre South in the Mount Springs country, on Arabunna country. And so Annie and I and two others, Heck and Saul, we came up here to Aubrey Creek, and we went out. We thought actually people lived out at the Finnis homestead, and we didn't see anybody, so we had to go back disappointed that we couldn't connect with anybody. But when we got back to Andamuka, the 30 people that we'd left in that morning were now nowhere to be seen. The police had come in and grabbed everybody and thrown them in the back of the paddy wagons with whatever they had on them at the time, and dropped them in the main street of Port Augusta at about 1 o'clock in the morning. Right? Well, suddenly there was just Annie, myself, and our young son, who was born during that period of time, and we realised that once we were right in the middle of the mine site, and then we were 8 kilometres away. Now we were 35 kilometres away in Andamuka, and all the people had been taken. So for us, it sort of ended our campaign in that manner against Roxby, yes. So we went east and visited our families and that, showing our parents the new grandchild and so forth, but we couldn't get it out of our heads, the injustice of everything that we'd just been through and so forth. I had a court case in Adelaide, so in February of 85 we came back to Adelaide, caught up with some of the activists from the Blockade who were interested in the water aspect, and as a group we came back up to Maree and to Aubrey Creek, and connected with Reg Dodd, who's the traditional owner and Arabunna elder for Finnis Springs, and he graciously allowed us to stay at the Aubrey Creek railway siding house, and
where we are right now.
That's it. And there was about 12 of us to start off with, and we then set up an information centre, and we set up a group called the Mountain Springs Collective, and our role was really to keep an information centre, give information to tourists that were coming along, monitor the springs, keep an eye on what Roxby's activities were here up in the springs, sort of play host to specialists and anyone who wanted to come here and do scientific research, maintain a presence once again, and during that period of time I started to take some water flow readings from some of the bores and some of the springs that were out at near Hermit Hill.
Tell me about the Mound Springs.
Yeah, well, the Mound Springs are a natural forming mounds that occur when water that is sort of that is mineralised water finds its way from an underground aquifer up through the rock via a vertical leak, what they call a vertical leakage, which would be sort of cracks and so forth like that. And when it comes to the surface, the water evaporates and leaves the deposits of the minerals. And over time, that builds up and sheds over it and forms a mound. And those mounds continue to grow, and they'll continue to grow sort of proportional to the artesian pressure and the height that the water can actually achieve. And so a typical mound spring you'd see the mound. At the top would be the pool, which is called the spring vent, and then you'd see this little flow of water that comes out from the spring vent, and that's called the spring flow tail. And within those particular flow tails and in those particular springs can exist flora and fauna and invertebrates that don't occur anywhere else on the planet. They're just in this spring within what's called a spring complex, which is a grouping of the springs. And so they're around this area where we are now, around Hermit Hill. There'd probably be about 12 different spring complexes, but they would encase probably over 1,000 individual little springs. Okay. Now just to the west of all these springs, not far, probably within 8 k's of the springs, is where Roxby have chosen, I guess, to put their bore field A. And in the beginning, it was estimated that they were going to be extracting about 33 million litres a day from that area. And of course, that would have a catastrophic impact on the ecosystems that rely on the artesianness of the water to get to the surface and then flow out into these spring tails. So that was our focus, and we were here for probably for about 10 months until finally the summer, the heat, the fact that we'd dwindled down to just Annie, myself and our young son, who was just about a year old, together with a plea for help from elsewhere, we decided that we would leave, basically. It was a bit like that. Reluctantly, we felt that there wasn't much more that we could do as a small group without reliable transport in the middle of summer, and with probably seemingly little support from outside.
So for that 10 months you were hosting people, holding the presents, keeping the house, and then you started doing like various sort of citizen science tests, just started learning what you could about the springs and monitoring them yourselves.
Yeah,
that's amazing. Right. How did you find the springs? How did you know they were there?
Well, we knew that the springs were there because as part of our research into Roxby, was the EIS, the Environmental Impact Statement, and so we tried to make ourselves cognizant with that document, and within that document was a section on the Mount Springs. So we knew around about where the springs were and so forth, but it was Reg who basically introduced us to the springs, and so we'd finally come to an end of our stay here. But over the years we've intermittently come back and to continue with these water flow readings, such that we could try to get evidence, in a way, empirical evidence over time, using simple but I think recognised and credible methods, to get data and to get so that when or if challenges could be made to Roxby regarding their pumping at Borefield A, then we wanted to be able to contribute, and that was how we could contribute, really, as we were, trying to live lives and growing up a family and so forth. That was our input.
And what are Roxby pumping the water for? What do they do with the water, the 33 million from Poorfield A and beyond?
Well, the water is first of all for the processing of the ore. It's uranium, copper, and gold and other rare earths that are essentially sort of in a lump when they're bringing it out. So they've got to separate it into those different areas, and that's done by a flotation method. So it's requiring a huge amount of water for the industrial complex. It's also providing water for the workers, the whole sort of infrastructure of the immediate mine site. It provides water to the Roxby Downs township, and also it's piped to Andamuka. It also now supplies their water. Okay. So it's, but the bottom line was that in the first instance, they were given the license to be using, just for the physical thing of, each person per day, it was 650 litres each person was allocated per day. So that's quite a lot of water to allocate one person. So they probably used that as a lot of the initial agreements were made on figures that were beyond what they probably were true. Like the numbers of workers involved, the amount of water that they need for people. A lot of stuff was kind of, so at each step they have a license for originally 33 million litres, and then it went up to 42 million litres a day that they were, able to access.
And is that what they're pumping now?
Well, no, now what they've done since then, so probably they're pumping, Poorfield A started in about 1985. Right, before that they were just sort of testing, a sort of surety of supply. Originally it was going to be 33 million litres from Poorfield A.
So much.
But they never managed to reach that. And then they could see early on that what they were doing was having an effect on the artesian pressure, and they weren't actually getting the volume they needed. So, but part of the original act that governs Roxby, the Roxby Indenture, made room for them to have another bore field further out into the GAB at Malurina Station called Borefield B. And that was going to be in the vicinity of about 80 million litres a day. And together with Borefield A, it was going to be about 100 million litres a day that they were going to use. So now you've got Borefield B is online now, has been for quite a number of years, and without having the figures before me, I would guesstimate that there would be probably using about 70 million litres a day from Borefield B, and I've just discovered just recently seeing an old map commissioned by Don Dunstan, who became Premier of South Australia. The waters from Borefield B up at Malurina Station on this map are the best quality underground water in South Australia. And that's what this uranium mine is being given.
All the people in Adelaide drink shit.
To pump. Adelaide people wouldn't be too happy to know that the best underground water in South Australia is going to a uranium mine, while they've got to drink the water that's come 4,000 kilometres and had everything thrown into it and then chemicalised, and so there needs to be certainly oversight into what they're doing up at Borefield B, and the federal government and the state government seem to be reluctant to do that. They're almost complicit in the whole affair by their partnerships with BHP as such.
And you're coming on 40 years of doing this research as to the pressure and the health of the springs. So what is happening? What have you noticed from?
Well, what I've noticed over this time is that the flow rates have dropped dramatically. Some have dried up 100%. Most of the springs show signs of distress. Higher springs are starting to cap themselves, and by that I mean as the water drops, the table drops, and not as much water can get to that pool, which is the spring vent at the top. The water still evaporates, but the minerals aren't flowing over the side, so they're accumulating in this sort of aperture, and it gradually closes until finally it plugs. And once it plugs, then it sort of the minerals harden and into almost like a calcrete, and so therefore no more water can get through that hard barrier. In some cases, the water will find a weak point in the mound and then start seeping out in a different direction. But the consequence of that is that the original springtail and everything that lives within it dries up and dies. That's happening on all the spring complexes that we've seen, and that's local to the area adjacent to and within the vicinity of the borefield A. They're the springs most under stress. Having said that, there is a sort of like an extrapolating effect that happens when you pump water from a bore, and that is the water table sort of bends such that it creates this really narrow funnel that goes down to the bottom of the bore casing, and then comes up, and then sort of curves outwards towards the periphery. Okay, and as the table drops, these curves become more lower and lower and lower, so that in the immediate area you could drop the table quite deeply, almost to the depth of the bottom of the bore. But 5 kilometres away you might have dropped it 3 metres, and 50 k's away you might have dropped it 1 metre, and 100 k's away it might have dropped 6 inches, and 1,000 kilometre away it might be 10 mils. Who knows? But so the potentiometric head, that is that sort of that line of a potential water table that the underground waters are trying to reach, and that's why it's coming to the surface, because there is this sort of imaginary sort of line above sea level that above ground level that the artesian waters are trying to reach, and as that gets lower, of course, the vitality and the pressure of it doesn't allow it to sort of to get. And once that happens, once the water does not reach above ground anymore, then it's non-artesian water. Okay, and that's a consequence of a potential consequence of Roxby's borefields A and B, is the dewatering of the local, regional, and perhaps even as far as the interstate groundwaters. Yeah.
And we're talking about like a huge level of endemism in the springs as well, right? Endemic species in the springs that have...
Look, there's been many found. I mean, we're not botanists, okay, but there are many studies done about a wide range of fauna and flora. For us, the species that we've been observing and keeping an eye on all these years is a little patch of pipewater or bottom grass called Ericolan carcinite, which was found at Hermit Hill Springs, and that's only in one spring tail, so the consequences of that particular spring drying, i.e. that the spring vent closes over, is that springtail will dry up, and no doubt the species will be lost.
Well, the other thing too is that as the water drops underground, it also impacts on the ability for any surface water to be sustained, for animals, for birds, for people, for, it's sort of very dramatically obvious at all of the springs, is that where you used to see quite large bodies and flows of water in the channels, it's very much less than what it was, and in one particular area it had gone completely. And so where you once had thousands of birds, like literally in, migratory birds particularly, it was, like the pelicans used to they go periodically to Lake Eyre, but these springs, they're the staging points along the way, and thousands of birds everywhere. And now you could count on two hands the number of birds you see out of the springs. So, and the ones that have actually dried up, the animals would no longer be able to roam that country because there's no water for them anywhere. And, so together with what's happening further south with Roxby in the mine site itself, it's on a different aquifer, it's on a different water situation. But overall, the land degradation through loss of water is widespread. There's an area out near the springs out here where every tree in sight is in a dying process. So it's the loss of water underground, but it also has this natural correlation with what's happening on the surface as well. And that goes right across the whole continent.
Yeah, it's
actually.
the basin.
And that's where people really need to be aware that what's happening below is happening. Your rivers will dry up much, much quicker if you're underground. If your water table has dropped, it's not sustaining the water on the surface as well. So, it's a really big impact that needs to be looked at. And it certainly, being the lowest point of the Great Artesian Basin, the pressure is greatest here. And so you might still be having your water flowing into here and they're pumping away. Yeah. But what's happening at the further afield? And especially when we know, of course, that every pastoral lease has a bore, or more than one bore, or many bores. We know that it was already depleted. The GEAB was already depleted before Roxby even came online. So the added stress of this pumping regime down here is necessarily having impacts that haven't been really studied and need to be. We really need to have a good hard look at what's going on across the continent, and because the GAB covers such an area involving New South Wales, Queensland, Northern Territory and South Australia, different aquifers in Western Australia, but everything is interrelated. Everything has a correlation, and if you start reducing one area, then other waters may take up, be drawn to that area to refill that water, and then it's depleting there, and there isn't a great deal of recharge across this basin. So,
by which you mean the rain?
Rainfall, there are recharge points, but it's not enough to keep replacing what is being lost. And that's why we think it's, even though they've reduced the pumping from Borefield A, the springs are not picking up because the recharge is not there. And that's what we don't also know about the impact of Borefield B and what's how that impacts on this area as well. So there's a lot of study that needs to be done, a lot of investigation. But in the first instance, we're asking, we will be calling for the cessation of extraction from Borefield A, and an investigation into Borefield B and the Great Artesian Basin per se, And it's really important that people across every area, become really familiar with your water and where it's coming from, because it's the one thing where, the whole country's under stress of water loss. And we really, really need to be very mindful of what we're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the pollution of water is also a huge thing because, as Al said, people in Adelaide are drinking like water. You cannot drink it, So it's like, and then that has another impact again too, where areas of good water are now being massively over extracted for bottled water. Bottled water is like, there are areas in Western Australia, Aboriginal communities in Western Australia, who can no longer drink or have any use of their underground water. It's so highly mineralised with nitrates that are, for humans, there's a level that is unacceptable for human consumption. So those communities are having to be supplied with bottled water. That's it. They can no longer use their underground waters. So it's really a big issue. And this being the lowest point on the continent and the last resting places of the million-year-old waters, this is our focus. This is where we know we have to really draw the line and try to engage with everybody else as well. Yeah.
And are you able to find hope in this area, in the water here?
I do. I can see that if they stop the borefills A and B, I feel strongly that over time the recharge will come back into the area and an equilibrium will be achieved. Whether it's the same pre-Roxby, I don't know. It's taken how long it's going to take to recharge an area after they've been pumping that amount of water out every day for nearly 40 years. I couldn't do the maths, but give it time. The water is being drawn wherever there's where pumping happens. There's the water then gets pulled to that to fill those gaps, those areas where there's no water because of the pumping, and so it pulls it through through a sort of a process of permeability. That's where most of the waters of the GAB reside. It's in sort of water permeable sandstone, right? And so it percolates. It percolates at a speed that's slower than a snail. And so you can understand why it takes so long to get from New South Wales and Queensland all the way down to here, underground, percolating, and it pulls. Water has that amazing ability where it wants to join each other, and it's really elastic, and there's some sort of communication between it, so that when one moves in this system I'm talking about, it pulls the rest of the water through to take its place, and so that's how the movement happens. And but it will take a while. It will take a while, but I reckon it will happen. Yeah, I reckon it will. And then you should see this part of the basin repressurising, and if they cap the bores that they've already put in, then the water will be there and the pressure will be there for the springs, and everything will be done.
Yeah, it's true that from what we've observed everywhere, you take the problem away and the land looks after itself. It'll come back, it'll heal, it will be strong, but you've got to get the problem away. And really, Roxby needs to go.
Yeah.
It never should have happened. We really tried. People have been, every which way. In this past 40 years, people have been trying to rein in any advancement on the nuclear proliferation in this country, and we're still working very, very hard to do that. And it's in everyone's interest to be mindful of what's happening and what's, going on with the whole development around nuclear, and to do whatever you can to rein it in and to stop it, because it has no good outcomes. The old people taught us, leave it in the ground, and we have to listen to those people. We have to listen to the country. We have to be really aware of all the impacts that are happening, and be very active. It's about all of us. Like, none of us are separated from these issues, and but there is certainly, for young people especially, to feel that no one has the last word. We just keep working towards what you can envisage being a happy, sustainable future for the world, and that's our objective, is not to be thwarted by all this stuff that's being thrown at us, that we have the strength and the energy and the insight to know that we can do things, that we're not constrained to what's being told, that, everyone has the freedom to define their own future. Yeah.
There's a lot of other worlds possible.
Yeah. And there's ever new things unfolding, and each person will experience their own newness in the world, and you find things that you never thought were possible just right under your feet, or so it is very important to be proactive in your own life, no matter what it is, and to feel good about your life and feel good that you have this opportunity to help and to realise a positive future. Yeah.